This is part one of fleshing out your character. In the previous tutorial, I completed this armature. Here's part of it here. The next step is going to be, considering this is the bones, the next step we're going to be doing is putting some flesh on these bones to shape the character. So a brief word about foam rubber. I'll go over some of the other tools you'll need, but this is foam rubber. You can probably get it at craft stores like Michael's or Joann Fabric. It comes in sheets, it comes in blocks. This is an open cell polyester foam, and it's regular density. It's kind of basically mattress foam or cushion foam. And there are different kinds. Like I said, this is a little bit higher density foam. This is already kind of carved into a shape, but you can feel that this is just a little bit more dense. Then there is slow foam, and this you see in mattresses and pillows. You can see that it kind of expands very slowly. This is really superior foam to use for carving your puppet. If you can get some of this, it's great. It really has this way of kind of collapsing but then filling back out, and it's very versatile. Lastly, for my technique that I'm going to go over tonight is this stuff. It's basically a thin sheet foam. It's called pre-wrap. And pre-wrap is used mostly in sports for wrapping around ankles and wrists, for gymnasts and people who play soccer and other things. It's really nice stuff. It comes in different colors. You can order this online. This is kind of the same color as the foam I'm using, but say if you're going to be making a character that's dark blue or red, you can find some of this pre-wrap in that color. Then you won't have to fight the color if you're going to be painting the character or flocking it. Okay, let's talk about the glue that we're going to use for this part of making your puppet. This is contact cement. You can get it at most hardware stores. I really prefer this. It's very durable, it's long-lasting, it stays flexible, and has a very good bond. Some of the other glues we use, like the ones we use at school, can kind of get a little bit hard and a little bit stiff, but this remains flexible and works well with the foam. We're going to talk about how this works with the foam, making sure you understand the technique. The last bit of equipment you're going to use, besides a Sharpie for marking the foam, are scissors. This is just a regular pair of scissors, which are fine if they're fairly sharp and fairly new for carving foam. But what I really prefer are these. They're made by Frisker, and you can get these online. They are basically garden shears, and they have this nice spring-loaded handle. So what happens is when you start doing some of your carving, half the battle is not having to reopen this and put your fingers in there. This ends up being a lifesaver for when you're doing a very complicated and lengthy process. The first part of foaming out your character is making sure you have foam that's thick enough to fill out the depth of your character. I've got this nice thin piece of foam just for this quick demo. So what I'm going to do is referring back to my drawing for my character and also making sure it lines up with my puppet. I'm going to line my armature up, and I'm going to use a Sharpie to trace out the outline of my character's torso. Now you'll notice I'm kind of using the edge of the foam. You don't want to use the center of the foam, because what you end up having is this piece cut out in the center, then all this scrapped you have to throw away. But to conserve the foam, because it can be a little expensive, be very conscious of what part of it you're using, because once I cut this part out, I have the rest of that to do other limbs and other bits of characters. So what you're going to do is you're going to trace that out. And if you have the nice pair of scissors that we were mentioning earlier, you can carefully cut this. Sometimes it gets difficult to cut, so you can't kind of cut the whole thing at once. So what you're going to do is kind of jab your scissors in there like so, and kind of work your way around. You can also do this with an X-Acto blade, if you have a fresh blade, you might be able to cut this. The absolute best way for really thick foam is to use a pair of like a knife, an electric carving knife. I have one that I use for bigger projects. That goes right through this. But for these little projects like this, you're just going to start with this basic form and using the scissors. So I know this looks very shapeless right now, but you have all these high points that we have to start carving. We want this to look like a torso. So what you start with is, if you look at it on angle or on end, you have this high point right here. Should be oval shaped because that's kind of the shape of the body. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to carve off one edge of it. Okay, so now if you look at the end, you have 1, 2, 3 planes. So it's not square anymore, it's starting to kind of round off. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of these high points off like this and keep on taking those high points. And then if you start to look at that edge, it's starting to get round. You see, this is what it used to look like, or kind of more like this, but now it's starting to round. So the finer and cleaner you get this, the better it's going to be for your puppet. Now what I always do is I always shape all of my foam off of the puppet. I'm going to be flashing some stills of a puppet I made for my film to kind of demonstrate that. But if you're doing all the work here, it's not connected to the armature. If you had this on the armature, it would be hard to get to the foam because you'd have to bend the wires and it kind of gets very, very complicated. But by shaping this and keep on carving it, you end up with something that's more like this. So let's set this aside and say I've taken it a little further. And what happens when you start carving foam is it gets everywhere. It's got kind of a static cling sort of feel to it. But you can start getting these kind of really fine details or smoothing details and shaping. And what you want is you want to carve this foam not to look like your puppet's physique, but your puppet's costume. So this character or this kind of example, imagine the character wearing pants. So you've got the legs shaped out, and when I put my fabric around there, it won't flutter around. It will actually be the shape of the costume. Now, if it were supposed to be tight-fitting to his torso, you would want to shape this like a leg and that sort of thing. But the basic idea is you can kind of start taking liberties by bending the foam out of the way and going in there and getting it smoothed out. The smoother you get this and the more shapely it is to your final character, the easier it's going to be when you start doing your costuming, and that puppet will look just like your drawing because you've got all this control. To do some of your refined work and the way to clean this up, you can see all these little ridges. A technique I've used is I've actually taken the scissors and kind of almost sheared it like you would shear a sheep, where you kind of do these quick cuts like so, and you roll it into the curve or into the shape of the limb or shape you're doing. Going from different directions really helps. But you can see these little pieces kind of come off. When you first start carving this, you're getting these large pieces like that, but then later on when you're getting to the shape you want, you can get these really, really fine little pieces like that. You know, like this right here is a perfect example. You could do all kinds of complex shapes too. So if this character had a more muscular leg, you could carve this in to show the shape of the leg, the knee kicking out, give it a little bit more of a buttocks. But there's no end what you can do with the shaping of this. And the more work you do here and the more refined it is, the easier it is on the other end. So take your time with this, have some fun with it, don't be in a hurry, and don't leave these big, ugly gouges. I know it seems like a tedious thing, but if you don't like tedium, you're in the wrong business.
3 weeks later.
The next step for fleshing out your character, once you've done all your carving of your foam, and again, this is just a quick example, but you have to know which way your front is and which way your back is. So let's imagine that this is the front of the character, and this would be the character walking like so. This would have to line up with our armature, and we have to double check it with the armature at all times. But what you're going to do is you're going to find the back side of the foam, and you're going to use your Sharpie once again, and you're going to mark some lines of where you want to split your foam. Okay, so you can see that I'm going to want to split this foam so I can insert my armature. I need it for the spine and for the legs. So at this point you could use your scissors, but what I like using is a good old box cutter blade. You have to be very careful with it. You don't want to cut yourself. But what I can go and do is I can line this up like so, and I can start to slice into the foam. You don't want to slice all the way down. You want to kind of go halfway. You want to make sure that you've buried your armature in the middle of the foam. So you want the wire in the middle of the foam here and here, and the middle of the spine coming out this way. Now, if this piece were made for this actual puppet, I would have the entire torso done, maybe the arms separately, but for right now, just for this example, I'm going to show you this. So, so you're going to split it. You're going to start splitting. You might not be able to get all the way down to the halfway point, but you could then kind of spread it apart and do a little bit of refining and cutting a little bit deeper. Again, try not to split it. And you'll see that I'm doing it on the back side, so you have a nice continuous piece of foam here. And if there are any issues with the seam, it'll be behind the puppet or in a less, in a less visible area. So I'm going to cut this all the way down to the halfway point, and doing it here as well, and then across here. At this point, sometimes it's a little difficult to get in there, so you can go in there with your scissors and cut. But you can see what I'm doing now is I've got this kind of nice open space. If it's not quite deep enough, but you're kind of close, you can either cut it some more, you can kind of carefully spread it apart and tear it open just a little bit. But if it needs a little bit more coaxing open, just go in there and use your blade. So the next step is to put this into the armature, or put the armature into this. So you can see that because I've made the openings just right, that I can sink the foam in there all the way. And it kind of just fits in there very snugly. Now sometimes if you have thicker areas like this, you might have to cut a pocket out so that there's enough room for the foam to kind of nestle around the armature. So right now you can see it's open a little bit, which is okay. The step after this is going to be gluing the armature together. So what we're going to do is we're going to brush some contact cement on all these inner surfaces. And once that sets up, then all you need to do is carefully close this up. Now again, this would normally go all the way down to the ankles if I needed to for this character, or all the way up to the torso, and even the arms. Sometimes I do the arms separately, but by making it a unified piece, when the puppet goes to move, it moves in a very nice way without any gaps. I'm not going to glue these together because this is my demo armature, but I want to talk to you about gluing. So this is the contact cement I mentioned earlier. Here's two nice pieces of foam that I want to glue together. Okay, so with contact cement, there is a solvent in there. That's what makes it kind of drip, and that's what makes it kind of flow. As that solvent disappears, it gets gooier and gooier. So with contact cement, it kind of sticks to itself very nicely. So for that foam piece, I would brush a thin layer of glue. I don't want it soaking. I just kind of want it covered on all the surfaces I want to glue together. And you don't just do it on one side, you do it on both sides. So for this part here, I would be gluing on both sides of that open gap. But for this example, I'm going to brush it on both sides of the foam. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait a full 60 seconds. I'm not going to just wait a minute. I'm going to wait a full amount of 60 seconds because what's happening is that the solvent is evaporating. What's left behind is the sticky glue. If I were to stick this together right now, it would stick a little bit, but not much. But once you wait that full minute, which we're going to do by stopping the camera, you'll see what happens. Okay, we've waited a full minute. And what happens is you can kind of see the glue kind of go from being shiny to being kind of a matte, dull finish. And you saw before, I would stick it together and they would kind of come apart pretty easily. But now that I've waited a minute, but don't wait more than a minute, don't wait more than 2 especially, because then the glue just kind of dries up and loses its adhesion. But I'm going to glue this together like so. And if you're very careful, you can kind of line up the seams of that piece that I just did. You don't have to even squeeze too hard. You can kind of see that I just stuck it together. And look, it is one piece. Okay, I can push it together just a little bit more. And you can still feel a little bit of moisture from the glue back here. So I might wait another few more seconds. But you can see that it sticks together. You know, if I were to continue waiting for just another 10 seconds maybe, I would pull these 2 pieces apart and the foam would tear before that glue joint would. It's because I waited that minute. If you don't, you'll be stuck trying to hold this tight and trying to say, oh, what's going on? Why isn't this working? It's because you didn't listen. So you're going to brush along these surfaces and wait that full minute and then carefully just line everything up until it closes perfectly. And then you'll have a nice clean seam back there. So contact cement, best thing to use. Wait that full minute and then you get that great adhesion. We will talk about the next step, and I'm going to be posting within this video some stills of the armature that I built for my film to kind of help you understand what the next steps are. So from the photos you've seen, this is the final outcome to that character that I was building. He's got a little bit of dust on him from animating, but you can see that the foam that I used was same type as this blue foam here, and you can see all these little ridges. Now the way I got rid of those ridges is by using pre-wrap, okay? And the pre-wrap helps smooth the foam out. Now this is only necessary if you're going to have exposed foam that you want to appear as a texture other than the clothing or fabric you're going to cover your puppet with. If this foam, if he was wearing pants, this foam is more than smooth enough to just work the way it does, because the fabric will fill in some of those gaps and smooth things out. However, if you do want to make a character like the one I just showed you, or you say just have like an exposed upper arm, you can use some of this pre-wrap to kind of smooth things out. You can still see a few lumps here and there, but what can happen is you put a little bit of glue on this surface and a little bit of glue on that surface, and then you can then wrap this around like so, and it kind of takes these large gaps or these large areas of foam and helps kind of thin them out and smooth them out so that you could then brush on either latex, or you can flock it like my character I was just showing you. But this is just a process, again, only if you want to smooth out foam that will be seen outside of clothing. You don't want to go too many layers, and you don't want to wrap it too tight. The puppet needs to have this squish and this posability. If you keep wrapping this tighter and tighter, what's going to happen is your puppet's going to lose its ability to bend because you've compacted the foam. So you really want to spend your time making the foam in the shape of your character and then doing a light sort of treatment on the surface to smooth those areas out if you need it. To finish things off, I want to talk about the fact that if you don't have a very bulky character, but a tall and lanky character, you can skip some of the foam carving techniques to just use pre-wrap by itself. So I've cut a small piece of pre-wrap, and I'm going to move this arm around. And I'd normally put a little bit of adhesive right there and a little bit on this, but then I will carefully start to wrap the limb and only make it as thick as I need to. But what this does is it gives it a thin, quick buildup of foam, which will make it easier for when you're doing your costume to have something for the fabric to grab hold of and not move around as you're animating it. Now you can kind of slowly creep your way up a limb like I'm showing you here. And you could build it up in larger areas like here and here to kind of start shaping a forearm or a bicep. But you can almost see it almost kind of sticks to itself. Now what you do want to be careful with is you don't want it to start folding over on itself, because that creates these just kind of strange lumps. If you have a relatively thick fabric for your costume, it won't matter. But this kind of bypasses having to carve all that foam into these tiny little tubes. It just makes it so much easier. So for a character like this, I might do it for the limbs, but I might carve the foam for the rest of the body. So that's the techniques I've gone over with you for fleshing your character out. Hope you enjoy making puppets.